The new beginning has just begun. Indeed it has. Which levels, people will be asked? All will be the answer. Now, before we get started, I'd like to wish Stephanie Arklick a speedy recovery from a unfortunate bike accident in this past week. I think she was trying to play Grand Theft Auto on a bike and sadly came off a bit worse. So hopefully all THI will support me in saying get well soon to Stephanie. Right, into the news we go. The FBI issued a fairly ominous tweet on Sunday, which encourages family members and peers to learn how to spot suspicious behaviours and report them to the FBI in the name of national security. Now, the FBI and the Pentagon need to look in-house for suspicious behaviours before resorting to pointing fingers elsewhere. Perhaps these are some of the families to report to the FBI, likes of the Bidens, Pelosi, Obama, Newsom, Brown, Cuomo, AOC, Clinton, Bush, Feinstein. Let's start with them, shall we? And perhaps the public should report BLM, Antifa, ADL, JINSA, J Street and AIPAC for suspicious behaviours. Because there's plenty on the surface there, never mind digging deeper. And the FBI have got to be very careful here, because they will become as far away from the public trust that the police are with this level of non-thinking. And all of this is, yet again, to stifle discourse, because they're losing the narrative. So let's come up with child-level games and snitch on our classmates, shall we? You know, it's utterly pathetic behaviour. And then we found out that Jill Biden, the wife of Mask Man, has joined the Sesame Street gang, and she will find it is like an extension of her husband and family, full of Muppets. The US government has indicated they will now start to censor your texts on misinformation, adding a text line to "the papers, please." French doctors and nurses reporting large amounts of deaths. Common theme of dying, they all had the second shots. As one nurse revealed this week when pointing a detector machine at the site of her vaccinated arm, it brought up an ID code reading, "Oh my." IDs are patented and now they are chipped like cattle. Meanwhile, the world is in utter turmoil, but some in the alt media still want to distract people with fake vote counting or fake elections for a fake government with a fake president. Can you not see the problem here? The alt media, or the alt in alt media, no longer stands for alternative. It is agency-led tripe. A lot of it. Stimulus checks are being mentioned again. But has anyone pondered on what they mean? Yes, you get some money, but does anyone really think, where did they come from or where do they go? Because in a closed system, which is the old world, the funds can only end up in one destination. Clown world. And the stimulus checks is an illusion game. Instead of openly giving lots of funds to clowns, which they do at alarming regularity and amounts, and their shell corporations, hello CIA, they use the money that the public generated. Remember, the governments don't have any money. They have ours. Then they decide to give it back to the people, and the people all think they've got free money. No, it's our own money. But here's the kicker. The people then spend the money, and because the clowns and their shell corporations own most of the businesses, guess where the free money goes back to? Them. The TPC, all kept in-house, stops that. Now, I've been waiting patiently for the French people to stand up, and finally they have, and I'm pleased that they are doing so after Macron said all French would be vaccinated by September. Really? We'll see about that, Mr. Macron. Greece and Ireland, thankfully, has also followed. TikTok. And now the fun begins. But I wish to reiterate, to demonstrate peacefully. No threats, no violence, and no smashing things. I would advise not to march on government centres. March on your news media centres and stand there silent, with banners saying liars and treasonous to humanity. They're the ones we have to shut down. The governments are just puppets. The media are everyone's mouthpiece. Haitian authorities last week escalated their hunt for what one official called the intellectual authors behind the assassination of the president Jovenel Moïse, saying that they had detained several suspects, including 2 US citizens, CIA, as they tried to keep the capital from descending into vigilante justice. Firefights between alleged suspects and police continued not far from the Pèlerin 5 neighbourhood of Port-au-Prince, where Moïse was killed and his wife Martine was seriously wounded last Wednesday. Now, the assassination of the 53-year-old president has deepened the spiraling political crisis in the impoverished Caribbean nation. Now, the 2 US citizens said to be of Haitian descent, identified as James Solages and Joseph Vincent, are among those who have been arrested. And they said at least 3 suspects had been killed, according to authorities, while 17 had been detained and 8 others remained on the run. Now, other than the Haitian Americans, officials said all of the suspects were believed to be Colombian nationals. We all know who's prevalent in Colombia, don't we? Now, the mysterious plot against Moïse was beyond Haiti's borders. Colombian authorities said that some of the suspects were former members of the Colombian army, and saying that they had launched an investigation into their alleged involvement. Now, Solages is described as a chief executive of EJS Maintenance and Repair, which was formed in 2019 and was registered in Florida. Now, he also launched a non-profit group in March 2019 focused on, quote, humanitarian efforts in Haiti, unquote, according to state records, which means he's tied to the Clintons then, or it's not plural anymore, Clinton. So Solages is described as a building engineer and a certified diplomatic agent. How does that work out? And he also said he was the chief commander of bodyguards for the Canadian embassy in Haiti. Masonry. And yet, Solages' uncle said in an interview, I don't know how this thing happened. He doesn't have any military training. But authorities said the assault was conducted by a team of commandos. Now, the Haitian judge Carl Henry Destin, who assessed the scene on Wednesday, and Moisey was found dead in his bedroom on his back, and his body was riddled with bullets, and he said he had 12 holes you can see, of which 5 were fairly big. Now, surprisingly, or unsurprisingly to our members anyway, Haiti officials called for the FBI and Homeland Security to come to their aid, but also the US military, which is all very Clinton Foundation to me, including the DNC criminal elements and the agencies. Why are they going back to Haiti? Lots of gold, lots of oil is why. And the same applies in Cuba, the so-called uprising. The people there are not complaining about the COVID BS. They're shouting Libertad, which is freedom from the oppressive systems, which is not communism, but Zionism. Yet again, we have more childlike behaviours from our so-called lead authorities, and quite frankly, this is embarrassing juvenile behaviour and an affront to all American taxpayers, in my opinion, and all of them should be fired. Democratic politicians in Texas have left their state en masse in an effort to prevent Republicans there from passing a law to tighten voting rules. And the move will temporarily paralyse the state's House of Representatives, which requires at least 2/3 of the 150 members to be present for the vote. And at least 50 House Democrats boarded 2 private jets, so much for global warming, from Austin to DC on Monday. Now, the move comes amid a wave of voting restrictions in Republican-led states, and the Republicans argue the measures are essential for election security, but Democrats see them as an attack on the right to vote. Now, the bill in Texas would ban 24-hour polling places and expand the authority of partisan poll watchers, and a first vote was planned later this week. Now, when they landed in DC, the Democrats said they would not return until a 30-day special session had ended next month. Now, Greg Abbott appeared on Abraham Angle on Monday to defend the bill and saying that the missing lawmakers will be arrested upon their return to the state. I hope he carries that through. And he said members of the Texas House of Representatives who are still in the state can call for the arrests of their colleagues who did not show up to vote. And the one caveat is the arrest has to be made in the state. Arrest them all, make an example of them. This is wasting taxpayers' money. And they should be deducted wages. In fact, I would deduct their wages for the rest of the year, personally, and put them in jail to stop this level of it's childlike behaviour. We don't like that law, so we're not voting. Really? And then you've got things like this going on. Whilst they're playing, let's not vote. World hunger and malnutrition levels worsened dramatically last year, with most of the increase, they say, is likely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. No, it's not. According to the clown agency UN. And after remaining virtually unchanged for 5 years, which is an indictment of their policies, the number of undernourished people rose to 768 million last year, equivalent to 10% of the world's population. I think that's an underestimation, or that may be the increase. And an increase of around 118 million compared to 2019. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic continues to expose weaknesses in our food systems, they say, which threatens lives and livelihoods. Well, it hasn't threatened billionaires' lives, given they've all made around 100 billion between them since it started. Why don't you get the money off them and give it to the people? And it says no region of the world has been spared, the UN agency said in a joint statement. Now, the 2021 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World estimated that on current trends, the UN Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger by 2030, zero hunger was the planning to wipe us all out, that's why, will be missed by a margin of nearly 660 million people. You telling me in 9 years they can't solve it? Seriously? 2 to 3 years, as you'll find out soon. Now, the number of people unable to access adequate food year-round rose by 320 million to 2.37 billion last year, a rise in 1 year equal to the preceding 5 years combined. And of the 768 million undernourished people, 418 million were in Asia, 282 million in Africa, and 60 million in Latin America and the Caribbean. In Africa, though, 21% of the people are undernourished, more than double that of any other region, which is deliberate. You know, Live Aid was, near 40 years ago? You're telling me they couldn't fix the food problem in 40 years? Does that make sense? No, it's a program then, isn't it? Now, I formulated a 2 to 3 year plan that involved all militaries, as they have the logistics to carry it all out, to end world hunger, provide decent homes for all, and start a road and business infrastructure program for those who currently don't have it. It got ignored by Trump. And this report is disturbing, and it's something that I brought to members' attention back in February of 2019 about a shortage of food. And food prices are increasing globally. I think it's 5% in America, it's increased. And what they're saying is because of the scarcity, they say. No, because of their evil agendas, I say, because we grow enough food per year to feed 3 Earths. Even if you lost a third because of the so-called fake pandemic, you've still got twice as much food to feed 2 planets. But all of this is despite the trustee promising to end world hunger on January the 8th this year. But like the various other promises made, retracted and then ignored, none have come to fruition. But it is that claim of ending world hunger that sticks in my craw. She would end world hunger within 2 days on January the 8th, was both crass, ignorant and arrogant, and oblivious to the logistics of carrying that program out. And it's all said for wows and clickbait, and look at how important I am. But the question remains, is it important or impotent? Because the latter wins hands down currently and shows no signs of abating. I'll end world hunger within 2 days. You never heard such drivel in all my life. And it's a slap in the face to the people globally. What was it? 2.37 billion. Me thinks that's an underestimate. I think it's over 3 billion. While I'm at it, I think I may, I'm going to request that any of our members to no longer engage with Life Force, as it's been used against our group, and I am being blamed for sending you there just to critique Kim and Tank. And everyone knows that's not true. But it's another attempt to deflect attention from the myriad of issues and failed predictions ongoing over there. So let us not give them the excuse to blame me or THI in any way, shape or form, as in essence it has nothing to do with THI, and let them face their own music. Accusations of gaslighting. Oh dear, the sheer irony of that. So I'm asking our members, please don't engage their groups, blogs or site and give them leverage to deflect their own issues onto someone else. Their group and assemblies are falling apart, not only in America but Europe also, having received many reports recently about the shenanigans ongoing of blocking members, firing them and yelling at members in several locations. They are continuing on illusions only now, and I'm asking our members to stay away. Now, to the many who have returned back to the TPC after joining the Life Force group, welcome back, including those who were not originally in THI. And now let's all get on with building our future again. You know, as Tank said this week, only the diehards left now. Indeed. Not for much longer, Tank. Your members have seen, heard and had enough of the lies, deflections, threats to members and the pure bullshit coming out of that show. You know, it's all so sad and completely unnecessary. But in reality, you cannot talk butterfly language to caterpillar people. The next section is all about race division and what they're up to. Now, more than 5,000 teachers have signed on to a pledge at the Zinn Education Project that states they vow to teach their students the concepts of the critical race theory, even where it was banned by law. Now, the Zinn Education Project is a campaign inspired by Howard Zinn and the author of A People's History of the United States, all of which will be a complete pile of bullshittery. Now, the project aims to indoctrinate America's students in identity politics, in other words, word salad, and the organisation of social justice movements, including the teaching of the critical race theory, which is a Marxist, communist, Zionist cultural ideology that embraces the concept that all social issues should be viewed through the lens of race, and claims white people are oppressors while black individuals are victims. Now, the National Education Association, which is the nation's largest teachers' union, resolved to promote the teaching of the critical race theory in K-12 schools and to oppose any bans on its instruction. I told you the schools were in on it. Now, the NEA also announced it plans to join with Black Lives Matter at school and the Zinn Education Project to call for a rally this year on October the 14th, which is George Floyd's birthday, and have a national day of action to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression. Zinn Education Project is ZEP for short. ZEP is a cleaning solution. Is this the solution for cleaning out? And who are they cleaning out is the great question. So where did this critical race theory arise from? Well, the author of the Zinn education project that spawned it is called Harold Zinn. And as a young man, Zinn made the acquaintance of several young communists from his Brooklyn neighborhood, and they invited him to a political rally being held in Times Square. Now, despite, they say, it being a peaceful rally, mounted police charged the marchers and Zinn was hit and knocked unconscious. And it said this incident would have a profound effect on his political and social outlook. Yeah, right. Howard Zinn, unsurprisingly, was born in New York and born to Jewish parents. It is not the Zinn project. It is the Zion or Zoan project. And Israel Cohen will be grinning past himself in the grave. And all black people need to be aware of what Israel Cohen stated back in 1912, that the black race has been used for thousands of years by the overlords to bring down and eliminate the white race. And it's time we all came together and fight these underhanded slime balls who say they are Jews, but they are not. And I think that's become very, very clear. California. 5 California police officers have filed a lawsuit against the city in Silicon Valley over a Black Lives Matter mural containing discriminatory anti-police imagery that was put on display across from the city hall. And law enforcement officers, including plaintiffs, were forced to physically pass and confront the mural and its offensive, discriminatory and harassing iconography every time they entered the Palo Alto Police Department, according to the lawsuit filed against the Palo Alto. Now, the lawsuit cites images such as the logo for the American Black nationalist organization, the New Black Panthers, and an image of convicted police killer Assat Shakur. Now, Shakur was known as Joanne Chesimard and was convicted in 1973 of killing a New Jersey state trooper. And she subsequently escaped prison, fled to Cuba, and has never been found. Now, the mural was put on display last June across from the Palo Alto City Hall and came amid a wave of protests and riots in response to the death of George Floyd. Now, it was intended to remain in place for a year, but was no longer on display by November of 2020. Look, I'm no police apologist, given that there have been far too much errant behaviour within their ranks against we the people. Doesn't matter which colour. In fact, the statistics says they do more damage to whites than any other colour on every level. But what I want to know is who sanctioned that inflammatory mural. Because it is they who should be charged and heavily fined for deliberate racial incitement. And it goes on. This is a program that we won 2 or 3 years ago. A New Jersey congressional hopeful and Air Force veteran launched a counterattack this week after Utah's Black Lives Matter chapter declared that the US flag is a symbol of hatred for Black Americans in a 4th of July Facebook post. And the Republican House candidate Billy Prempeh said The fact of the matter is that black people are Americans and black history is American history, and the flag is absolutely a part of our history. The good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. And that's what makes America great. Not quite. Because despite all of that, we continue to move forward. Now, the BLM Utah founder, Lex Scott, said earlier this week that the post was meant to highlight how her criticism of the flag would draw sharp criticism. That is incitement. While the embrace of Old Glory by hate groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, does not. Does it still exist? Probably somewhere. Why are they still mentioning it? The point behind all of this is it's clear now it's a program to divide the black and white people. It's not bound in any sort of common sense or any solutions to fix the problems. Not one solution have I heard about people coming together from these people. But if only what bothers me again is quite why people protect or defend a piece of cloth with colours on that wasn't even created in this country, I might add, is beyond me. And if only the people were as protective of their own fellow man, woman and child as they appear to be for a flag, things would be a whole heap nicer. As for Lex Scott, she is a useful puppet for the system and should be dismissed by the black people along with other puppets who think they are leaders of not helping blacks but supporting the media-led division of we the people. It goes on. Black News Tonight host Mark Lamont Hill is facing backlash on social media after the Temple University professor claimed during an interview that all white people are connected to racism. Fine. That's his opinion. But perhaps he needs to explain as to how or why that would be the case. Making statements is one thing. Anyone can make statements. But explaining your reasoning and providing proof are an entirely different story. Now, in better news on the engineered racial divide by the media and politicians at the behest of the overlords, a white supremacist group based in Texas was chased away by residents in Philadelphia after they tried to march in the state over the Independence Day weekend. And on Saturday night, around 200 masked members of the Patriot Front organization marched in the city. Now, the organization is listed as a white nationalist hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Well, I'll ignore their opinion because the Southern Poverty Law Center are a Jewish front group. They're part of the problem. But I'm pleased that residents counteracted them. But one must also caution, if you're going to counteract that group, you have to counteract the Black Lives Matter as well. The same must apply. Neither of them are operating for and by the people. And I'm asking residents of all colours to chase away any of these white supremacists, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa as well. Because most of these radical groups are actors, performing for their paymasters. It is all a stage show to distract and create opinions for the people. Ignore it. And them. It's all a dog and pony show. But what was extraordinary about that white supremacist story is the media exchange behind it. And Abdul Ali Muhammad, an activist and counter-protester on the night, told the Inquirer that black people are met with a different kind of response from police. Now, I admired the fact that a Muslim is defending the black people. But looking into his background, Mr. Muhammad has all the hallmarks of a stooge employed by the agencies. But then there was a counter-opinion on the CBS News channel, and one would think, given it was about white supremacists, they would have a white person, supremacist or otherwise, for the counter-argument. But no. No surprises for guessing who, as upturned Shira Goodman, Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. And she insisted to CBS that she make sure that this is not the case. The common sense question is, since when has the ADL been the oversight on cops? And she went on and said, we want to make sure that a group of white men and white supremacists who come in to do that aren't getting any kind of special treatment, aren't getting any kind of worse treatment than anyone else who's protesting. What has the ADL got to do with policing? And it's a classic case again of antagonising both sides to fulfil an agenda. And I hope people by now are seeing through this charade that this show warned would unfold 3 years back at least. It's the Israel-Cohen plan right before your very eyes. So not only do the ADL decide how the police should be policing, listen to this one. In what is frankly a bizarre and equally disturbing plot surrounding the Magic Imploding Hotel in Florida, we find out that the Israeli Defense Forces were brought over to oversee the search and rescue mission. Oops. Reeks of conspiracy, that to me. And it's also a slap in the face for the local search and rescue. Are they not adequate enough? Is there no one else in this country who can do search and rescue? Again, common sense again. Oh dear. But then, as reported last week, the mayor is born in and born too. And the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue bade farewell to the Israeli Defense Forces delegation Sunday evening as they began their journey home following their assistance with search, rescue and recovery efforts at Champlain Towers building that collapsed in Florida. The ADL deciding how to run our police, the Israeli Defense Forces doing search and rescue in our country. Let's continue with CBS. They seem to be playing the race card quite a bit. And also with the Florida collapse building. Because the CBS ran one of the heroic stories this week about how this one large family, there's about 10 of them, were all awake and all out of the building at 1 a.m. in the morning when the building collapsed. Now, where have we heard that before? It has echoes of a repeat narrative from 20 years ago now, this September, of how all the Israeli nationals survived the Twin Towers collapse. By a coincidence, the family covered in the heroic CBS story was Jewish. All a dog and pony show, the whole lot. Still on Israel and the incompetent United Nations human rights investigator is now being called anti-Semitic for remarks made Friday against Israel at the UN Rights Council in Switzerland. And critics say this is just another long line of anti-Israel bias stemming from the world body as it seeks to rewrite history. Oh, the irony of that statement. Rewriting his story. Dear me. Now, Michael Lynk, a special rapporteur on human rights in the Palestinian territories, was speaking to a meeting of the UN Human Rights Council, presenting findings from his report where he said he wanted to make it clear to Israel that its illegal occupation and its defiance of international law and international opinion can and will no longer be cost-free. Now, Lynk, who has long been criticised for his anti-Israel views, noted, "I conclude that the Israeli settlements do amount to a war crime." The reality is here, let's take the word Israel out, because that's a spell cast. What he's saying here is not anti-Israel at all. That's the deflection. It is anti-human rights violations that just happen to be the hallmark of Israeli occupations in many countries. They always use a deflection. It's a bit like the Chris Rice show the other week. Use a deflection and then pull up the label. Anti-Semitic. Just shuts down the narrative. But it's not about Israel. The fact that Israel are committing these crimes, perhaps they shouldn't do them. Now, Lynk's remarks immediately drew fire from critics who noted that his report and remarks excluded any criticism of terror group Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. Hamas and or the Palestinian Authority would not exist if Israel went back to at least the pre-1967 borders. Now, Anne Bayefsky, director of the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust, missing from his so-called 20-page expert report is a single reference to Hamas using human shields to any of the Palestinians killed by misfired Hamas rockets, or in fact to any Palestinian having committed any war crime at all. She said, "More statements and no proof." Are you seeing the pattern here? And so the real question is why the Biden administration has decided to join and legitimize this council and its preposterous human rights authority figures, knowing full well neither the council nor Lynk's platform can be or will be changed. Now, Bayefsky sits on the board of advisors of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, JINSA. Jin being the operative word. A non-profit think tank focusing on the issues, listen closely now, that focuses on the issues of the United States and Israel's national security. Common sense question again. What has Israel got to do with American national security? Can anyone answer? Now, the report on her says her legal expertise is in international human rights, women's rights, and United Nations law, and covers 4 decades. But to me, she's not such an expert after all, as she misses seeing the very country who breaks more international laws than any other countries combined. Now, in 2018, the pro-Israel non-profit Committee for Accuracy in the Middle East Reporting in America, or called CAMERA, paid Baevsky $280,000 for, quote, consultant work, unquote, according to a public federal filing. That, in real terms, is called lobbying and kickbacks, all for the benefit of one country. Now, of course, President Trump took the US out of the Human Rights Council in 2018, after we filled him in, Kim and I filled him in, well, Kim more than me, on the details of what was going on there. But then Nikki Haley, the United Nations ambassador at the time, said the 47-member council was a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Haley, like Pompeo, are Israeli puppets, is why. Now, in one of the many policy changes from the Trump administration regarding the UN Secretary of State Antony Blinken, said this past February the Biden administration would re-engage with the council and challenge for a seat in its 2022 session. Why is Biden going back to the UN? Well, look at his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Born in and born to. Truth never fears investigation, and the Israeli junta are masters at blocking every investigation into their antics. Where are we next? San Francisco next, and this is also an increasing warning. And the report said it's been looking a lot like Gotham City lately, as a recent surge of both petty crimes like shoplifting and organised retail crime in San Francisco has left business owners and residents troubled and even wanting to leave the city altogether. Now, this time the report says, however, there won't be a Batman to swoop in and save the residents of San Francisco. Batman wasn't a good guy. He was a dark elf. Now, the rate of larceny has increased 22%, 52% in burglary, 40% increase in arson, and nearly 37% uptick in vehicle thefts this year, according to the data from the San Francisco Police Department. But an annual poll from the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce that was released last month found that 80% of residents believe crime has worsened in recent years, and 76% want more police in high-crime neighbourhoods. Additionally, 40% of residents said they plan to move out of the city in the next few years. Oops. The obvious solution to crime is give everyone a more equal share of the resources. Expensive cities have more crimes. And it's the opportunity that presents itself that the criminal have-nots will target the have-too-many places. And I would suspect that cities and towns that are more equal in terms of wealth they will have a better crime rate. So with 40% planning to leave, I also found out this week that 1,500 people per week are now leaving New York. Still in California, Pelosi's relation, Gavin Newsom, has told California residents to use 50% less water. Really? All whilst allowing Nestle to siphon out millions of gallons out of California's water system. Tell them they can't siphon all the water is the solution to the problem. And it's the same with the electricity there. P&G, who are Rothschilds, have invested nothing in replacing old systems. And yet when there's an issue with large supply, those clowns cut it due to not having the capacity, or worse, caused fires that destroyed thousands of lives. The so-called richest state in the country, and yet they have such a poor record of delivering utilities to its overcharged residents. And decent Californians, like New Yorkers, should empty out of both states and leave the greedy vampiric entities left swinging in both states. You know, living in a state with Brown, Feinstein, Newsom and Pelosi is bad enough. But what is worse is you are living amongst people who voted for those four scumbags. It's Stockholm Syndrome on steroids. They should have been run out of town. We're off to Germany next. And a sad story, but at least it's now out into the light and uncovered and makes people more aware. And in Germany's latest horrific case of child abuse, it was found that pedophiles had filmed sex acts on their own children to share online. And it said kids learn stranger danger, but a lead campaigner says to think the unthinkable about who the real abusers are. As 4 pedophiles begin their prison sentences this week, having been found guilty of being part of the biggest child abuse ring ever uncovered in Germany, one of the nation's most tireless campaigners has warned that sex abuse of children is at epidemic levels. The activist Julia von Wieler from the German branch of global NGO Innocence in Danger says that the World Horror Organization estimates 1 million German children having suffered sexual violence is way too low. And she said the problem authorities face in compiling figures is the high incidence of unreported abuse, because it is the so-called authorities doing it is why. And it's the classic mind control Milgram experiment. The church, the police, judges, lawyers, politicians, social services, children's charities, the UN and many others supported by hospitals, doctors, schools and universities. They're all in on it. And let's not forget theme parks. Hello, Disney. Now, several years ago, the Mercado study funded by the Federal Ministry of Family Affairs found that 2/3 of child abuse survivors never disclosed their trauma to anyone. And the study also pointed out that just 1% of abuse cases were reported to the police and or youth welfare agencies, she said. So if we take that 1% as our baseline, then the 1 million estimate by the World Horror Organization is actually a rather low figure. A recent study showed that 1 in 68 UK children are missing or trafficked in 2020 alone. And it said the UK is one of the most prominent countries for trafficking. Why? The White Race Life Essence, as reported in Jupiter Ascending movie, is why. And studies also show 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused. Over a third of police reports of sexual offences are on children. And there was a petition against it, and it was rejected, citing it wants pedophilia to become a sexual orientation. That was to the UK government. Citing it wants pedophilia to become a sexual orientation. Now, the British Home Office were found recently to have given £30,000, which is about $36,000, to a group who wished to legalise pedophilia. A quarter of all trafficked children go missing through local authoritative care, for example, social services. And a Whitehall study showed that advisors want the age of consent dropped to 14 years old, along with a dramatic reduction in statutory punishments for sex with children as young as 12. Now, if you think things are getting worse with those two reports, you are wrong. This has been going on a long time on this planet. And what is different now is it is being picked up on the internet and being reported everywhere, when previously these incidents were kept in the dark and the media deliberately ignored it. Well, that is no longer the case. And yes, it's painful to hear, but the frequency of truth now is out into the light. And it starts the healing process for those who have survived these types of ordeals. And because part of the problem is people ignored the warnings and the protestations of the children, because the church, the police, the social services, the nuns, bishops, priests, politicians, famous stars wouldn't do that. Yeah, right. Actually, no, they were wrong. They're all involved in it. And it's time people quit being in denial of the truth, because the reluctance for the masses to accept the institutions that are said to protect us cannot be complicit in this is why it has continued for so long. Final piece before a break. A good news story. Given what was mentioned earlier, a teenage basketball prodigy has become the first African American to win the US Scripps National Spelling Bee competition. Zayla Avant-Garde, a 14-year-old from New Orleans, cruised to victory with the word morea, which is a type of tropical tree. Now, despite practicing for up to 7 hours a day, she describes spelling as a side hobby, as Zayla's main focus is on becoming a basketball pro. And she already holds 3 world records for dribbling multiple balls at once and has appeared in an advertisement with the NBA megastar Stephen Curry. Now, it was the first time, take note of this, it was the first time since 2008 that at least one champion or co-champion of the Scripps National Spelling Bee was not of South Asian descent. That is a national disgrace. for the American people. 13 years. And an American has money in your own country. Now, Zayla is the second black girl to win the tournament. Jodi Ann Maxwell of Jamaica was crowned champion in 1998 at the age of 12. And some people will say, why is that news? Well, given the political use or misuse of colour recently, the fact a black girl won is quite an achievement, given what the BLM and so-called woke people have been trying to tell us. And like that woman last week trying to convince us that that blacks are discriminated against in schools, well, clearly it's not all, is it? And well done, Zayla. It matters not which colour you are, but you've done really well.